A man stands in the open desert, face to face with what the text calls the Lord himself, and does something almost nobody in the rest of Scripture ever attempts again. He starts negotiating, not begging, not simply interceding, bargaining point by point like two men haggling over the price of a field. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? And God, astonishingly, engages. 50 becomes 45. 45 becomes 40. 40 becomes 30, then 20, then 10. And even after all of that, even after talking God down 5 separate times in a single conversation, the cities still burn. This is the same old Bible. Stay until the end, because the real question this story leaves you with isn't why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It's why Abraham stopped bargaining at 10, and what that number quietly tells us about exactly how far gone those cities already were. The scene opens not with judgment, but with hospitality on an ordinary hot afternoon by the oaks of Mamre, where Abraham sat at the entrance of his tent. He looks up and sees 3 men standing nearby, and immediately, without hesitation, runs from the entrance of the tent to meet them and bows himself to the earth. What follows is an almost overwhelming display of ancient Near Eastern generosity. Water for their feet, rest under a tree, and then Abraham hurrying into the tent to tell Sarah to quickly prepare bread before running to the herd himself to select a calf, tender and good, and giving it to a servant to prepare. This is important to notice before anything else happens in this story, because it sets up a contrast the rest of the narrative depends on entirely. Abraham, a nomadic herdsman living in tents in open country, treats 3 unannounced strangers with lavish, immediate generosity. Soon, we're going to watch an entire city respond to 2 of those same visitors with something close to the opposite. While they eat, one of the visitors asks where Sarah is and delivers an announcement that stops the scene cold. I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. Sarah, listening from inside the tent entrance behind him, laughs to herself, thinking of her own age and Abraham's, and asks silently whether she'll really have pleasure now that she's worn out and her husband is old. The Lord's response cut straight through the tent wall. Why did Sarah laugh, saying, "Shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord?" That question, is anything too hard for the Lord, isn't just connected to Sarah's pregnancy. It's the same question the rest of this story is quietly built around, applied to something much darker. Is anything, including the wickedness of an entire region, beyond what justice can eventually reach? And is anything, including saving a stubborn man and his family from the middle of it, beyond what mercy can accomplish? As the men get up to leave, walking in the direction of Sodom, something remarkable happens, described almost like an internal monologue inside God himself. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. God chooses to explain himself to Abraham, not because Abraham has any authority to overrule the decision, but, the text suggests, because of exactly the kind of man Abraham has been raised up to become, someone whose whole household will be shaped by understanding both righteousness and justice, not simply justice alone. And so the Lord speaks directly. Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. I will go down to see. It's a striking phrase for an all-knowing God to use, almost certainly written this way deliberately, to model something for the reader as much as to describe an actual divine process. Judgment, even divine judgment, isn't supposed to be issued from a distance based on rumor alone. It goes down. It investigates. It confirms. 2 of the 3 visitors turned to head toward Sodom, and Abraham, still standing before the Lord, does something extraordinary. He draws near and says, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" Sit with the audacity of that question for a moment. A man formed from dust is asking the creator of the universe whether he is about to act unjustly, and doing it not with trembling apology, but with the confident directness of someone who genuinely believes the answer matters, and that he has standing to ask it. The Lord's answer is immediate and remarkably generous. "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake." And then Abraham does something that should stop you cold if you've never noticed it before. He doesn't say thank you and walk away. He pushes further. "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Suppose 40 are found there. For the sake of 40, I will not do it. Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. 5 separate rounds of negotiation, and God concedes every single time. 50 becomes 45. 45 becomes 40. 40 becomes 30. 30 becomes 20. 20 becomes 10. Not once does the text show God growing impatient with the request, refusing to lower the number further, or ending the conversation early. Every single time Abraham asks for less, mercy expands to meet the request. And then the conversation simply ends. The Lord went his way when he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Abraham stops at 10, not because God refused to go lower. Nothing in the text suggests that. He stops because, presumably, 10 seemed like a number so small, so minimal, that surely, a city that size couldn't possibly fail to contain at least 10 decent people inside it. If you're already sensing how badly this is about to go, and how much that number 10 is quietly telling you, this is a good moment to hit like on this video, because what happens next in Sodom is going to answer, in the most concrete way possible, exactly how far short of that number the city actually fell. The 2 remaining visitors, now identified plainly as angels, arrive at Sodom in the evening, and Lot is sitting in the gate of Sodom, a detail worth pausing on because sitting at the city gate in the ancient world wasn't a casual location. It's where elders conducted business, settled disputes, and exercised civic authority. Lot, Abraham's nephew, who had chosen to settle near Sodom generations earlier because the land looked well-watered and fertile, has by this point fully integrated into the city's civic life. He sees them, rises to meet them, and bows himself with his face to the earth, echoing almost exactly Abraham's own hospitality at Mamre. "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They initially answer that they'll spend the night in the town square instead, but Lot presses them strongly, and they turn aside to him and enter his house. He makes them a feast and bakes unleavened bread, and they eat. The hospitality parallel to Abraham is deliberate, and it makes what happens next land even harder. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. The text is explicit about the scale here, not a rowdy few troublemakers, but the entire male population of the city gathered at Lot's door. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them." The demand is unmistakable in its intent, and it's the detail that gave this story its name for millennia afterward. An entire city's population attempting en masse an act of sexual violence against two guests under a host's protection, a violation so total it breaks every code of hospitality the ancient world held sacred, on top of everything else it represents. Lot goes out to them, shuts the door behind him, and pleads, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly." What follows next is one of the most genuinely troubling passages in the entire book of Genesis, and it deserves to be named honestly rather than smoothed over. "Behold, I have two daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." There's no version of reading this passage that makes Lot's offer admirable. It's a father proposing to sacrifice his own daughters to a violent mob in order to protect two strangers under an ancient hospitality code that, taken to this extreme, has become monstrous in its own right. Scripture doesn't editorialize on it directly in the moment, but it doesn't need to. The text simply lets the offer sit there, exposed, alongside everything else about to unfold. A household so thoroughly shaped by the surrounding culture of the city that even its one relatively righteous member has internalized a horrifying calculus about whose safety matters and whose doesn't. The crowd rejects the offer anyway, turning their aggression toward Lot himself. This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. They press hard against Lot and draw near to break the door down, and this is the moment the two visitors finally reveal exactly what they are. The men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the door of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out, groping for the door. An entire mob, blinded instantly, still trying uselessly to find a door they can no longer see. The angels turn to Lot with an urgent question. "Have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." Lot goes out and speaks to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters and says, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. His own extended family, hearing an urgent warning about imminent total destruction from the very man who has just hosted two beings capable of blinding an entire mob, laughs it off as a joke. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." And here comes one of the most quietly devastating details in this entire account, easy to skim past if you're moving quickly. But he lingered, the city about to burn. The warning delivered directly, urgently, by angelic messengers standing in his own home. And still, Lot hesitates. The men seized him and his wife and his two daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and brought him out and set him outside the city. The mercy in that sentence isn't Lot's decisiveness. It's explicitly, directly, the Lord's mercy, physically dragging a hesitating man and his family out of a city he seemed almost unable to fully let go of, even with the fire already gathering. Once outside, one of them said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." And Lot, even now, even in the middle of literally being rescued from certain destruction, negotiates. "Oh no, my lords, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved." He asks to be allowed to flee somewhere closer, somewhere smaller, somewhere less demanding than the hills he was actually told to run to. And remarkably, the angel grants even this. "Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there." The city is given a new name because of this exchange. Zoar, meaning little, permanently marked by Lot's own last-minute negotiation. If you've made it through the mob, the blinding, and Lot's lingering, this is a good time to subscribe if you haven't already, because what happens in the next few verses is the part of this story most people think they already know, and most people have never actually read closely. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. The description is brief, almost clipped, especially compared to how much space the negotiation and the night at Lot's house received. There's no lingering horror movie detail here, no drawn-out suffering described, just total, sudden reversal, an entire fertile valley, the same well-watered land Lot had chosen specifically because it looked so good, consumed in what the text implies was a matter of moments. And then comes the detail almost everyone remembers, even people who've never opened a Bible in their life. But Lot's wife, behind him, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Scripture doesn't dwell on her motivation. It doesn't need to, because the warning she disobeyed had already been stated with total clarity just verses earlier. Do not look back. Whatever mixture of grief, disbelief, or simple human inability to walk away from a burning home without one final glance drove that moment, the text treats the instruction itself as absolute, non-negotiable. Unlike almost every other request in this entire story that had been open to negotiation up to this exact point. It's worth noting that this detail mattered enough to Jesus himself, centuries later, that he referenced it directly as a warning of his own, while describing the urgency of being ready for the day of his return. Remember, Lot's wife. 2 words from someone who assumed his listeners would immediately understand exactly what he meant. The next morning, Abraham went early to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. Picture that scene for a moment, because it's the true closing of the negotiation that opened this entire story. The same man who had stood in that exact spot, talking God down from 50 righteous people to 10, is now standing there again the next morning, looking at smoke rising from the valley like a furnace. The text doesn't record any further words from Abraham in this moment. It doesn't need to. The smoke itself is the answer to every round of that negotiation. 10 could not be found, not 50, not even 10. And yet, in the very next line, something quietly remarkable happens, easy to miss if you're not watching for it. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow. God remembered Abraham. Lot's rescue, in the text's own framing, isn't credited primarily to Lot's own righteousness, his hospitality, or even his hesitant negotiated escape. It's tied directly back to God's relationship with Abraham, the same man who had spent an entire conversation pleading for the life of strangers he would never meet. The negotiation that seemed on the surface to have utterly failed, since not even 10 righteous people could be found, still produced exactly one household of rescue. The aftermath doesn't end cleanly either, and honesty requires walking through it rather than stopping the story at the pillar of salt. Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters because he was afraid to live in Zoar, so he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. Isolated, traumatized, having just lost his wife, his home, his sons-in-law, and the entire city he'd built a life inside of, Lot's daughters, believing incorrectly that no man remained anywhere on earth to continue their family line, get their father drunk on consecutive nights, and conceive children by him. The sons born from this, Moab and Ben-Ami, become the ancestors of the Moabite and Ammonite nations, peoples who would remain in complicated, often hostile relationship with Israel throughout the rest of the Old Testament. It's a deeply unsettling, close to Lot's story, and Scripture doesn't dress it up as anything other than what it is. There's no divine commendation attached to this episode, no blessing pronounced over it. It simply happened, or recorded with the same unflinching honesty the text applies to nearly every flawed figure in Genesis, and it stands as a quiet, uncomfortable reminder that surviving judgment doesn't automatically mean a family walks away from catastrophe unbroken. Before closing this out, it's worth asking a question most retellings of this story skip entirely. What precisely was Sodom's sin? Popular memory has narrowed the answer down almost exclusively to the attempted assault at Lot's door, and that event is certainly central to the account in Genesis 19. But Scripture itself, elsewhere, describes the fuller picture with striking specificity. The prophet Ezekiel, writing centuries later, puts it this way: "Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me. Therefore I removed them when I saw it." Pride, excess, comfort, without compassion, a wealthy, well-fed city that had every material advantage and used none of it to help the poor and needy in its midst before the specific violence of that final night ever occurred. The attempted assault on Lot's guests wasn't an isolated act by an otherwise decent society. It was the visible eruption of a much deeper, longer-standing rot, arrogance, indulgence, and a total absence of concern for anyone vulnerable that had apparently been hardening in that city for a very long time. That fuller picture doesn't soften what happened at Lot's door. If anything, it deepens the portrait of a place where every available form of decency, hospitality toward strangers, protection of the vulnerable, basic human restraint had eroded almost entirely, layer after layer, until violence became the city's default response to 2 unfamiliar guests. Later, New Testament writers returned to Sodom repeatedly, not as ancient history to be forgotten, but as a permanent reference point. Peter describes God condemning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ruin by turning them to ashes, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, while also specifically noting that God rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, because, as that righteous man lived among them, he was tormented in his righteous soul over their lawless deeds. Even Jesus himself references Sodom directly, and in a way that should genuinely unsettle anyone tempted to treat this story as simply an ancient tale of a uniquely wicked, uniquely doomed place, far removed from anything relevant today. If the mighty works done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I tell you, it will be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom than for you. Sodom, in Jesus' own comparison, becomes not simply history's worst example, but a kind of baseline, a city that, monstrous as it was, still receives a more tolerable judgment than places that witnessed even greater revelation and still refused to respond to it. So here, finally, is where this story actually leaves us, once you've walked through the whole of it, rather than just the fire at the end. Abraham's negotiation wasn't naive, and it wasn't a failure, even though the number he stopped at was never reached. It revealed something true and important about the character he was pleading with, a willingness to spare an entire wicked city for the sake of a small, faithful remnant inside it, all the way down to a number as small as 10. And when even that number couldn't be found, the mercy that had already been extended at the negotiation didn't simply vanish. It redirected precisely, personally, toward the one household connected, however imperfectly, to the man who had asked. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was never really a story about how easily God destroys. It's a story about how far mercy is willing to bend before judgment finally, reluctantly, has nowhere left to go. If this story left you thinking differently about the balance between judgment and mercy in Scripture, subscribe if you haven't already. Tell me in the comments what part of this story surprised you most. Abraham's negotiation, Lot's daughters offered at the door, or the moment his own family thought he was joking about the coming destruction. And if you want to see where this same tension between justice and mercy shows up again, generations later, in the story of a nation enslaved in Egypt, that video is already waiting for you on the channel. See you in the next one.